Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and it's indeed a pleasure to welcome you all to our inaugural web series, Conversations 101. Before we start off, I'd request everybody to keep themselves on mute because we're dialing in from very many places. It's quite possible that bandwidth issues do cause a lot of disturbance. So I'd be grateful if all of you could keep yourselves on mute. While most of you would be familiar with us, there may be a few of you on this webinar who are new to OneCrowd. I'll therefore start off with a brief introduction before then welcoming our eminent guest for the evening. OneCrowd is an early-stage venture investment fund and platform, and we play our part by forming an alliance amongst investors, entrepreneurs, and mentors. OneCrowd invests principally from two sources of capital: a dedicated seed and early stage venture investment fund and an equity crowdfunding platform that co-invests with a fund. So we typically invest in pre-series A opportunities which are sector agnostic, and our crowdfunding platform, which consists of accredited angels, co-invest with our fund in a predefined 50-50 ratio. The OneCrowd fund leads these investments, and those angels participating via our crowdfunding platform are represented by the fund. Startups are curated with one funds carrying out the entire gamut of activities from deal sourcing, origination, to conducting due diligence, documentation, and to post-investment monitoring and support. The OneCrowd fund, via its representative director on the board of the investee companies, provides the startup with guidance in areas of business development, strategy, organization building, financial planning and management, and capital raising, etc. We have a fairly strong pool of mentors. We have over 80 mentors with us. These are people with significant experience across domains, either as professionals or entrepreneurs or as both. To date, OneCrowd has invested in about 30-odd startups. We've invested over 120 crore rupees, that's about 1.2 billion, in about 46, 47 rounds of funding. Our typical deal size is in the order of about 2 to 4 crores. And our current sector agnostic platform portfolio, consists of companies from the edtech space, media tech space, healthcare, deep technology, like nanotech and biotech, etc. While we are sector agnostic, we have a strong bias for startups that combine knowledge and technology. Angel investors on our platform co-invest in a minimum ticket size of rupees 5 lakhs in each opportunity and have the choice to reject an opportunity if they so wish to. Fund investors participate with a minimum commitment of rupees 25 lakhs in our fund, but the discretion to invest is largely left to the OneCrowd investment management team. For those of you who are already part of our investor family, we thank you for your patronage and extend an invitation to those of you who are not and would welcome your joining us. My colleagues will be in touch with you. With that short spiel, I'm delighted that we are launching our web series, Conversations 101, which with your encouragement, we'd like to make a regular feature. And this is essentially to promote the alliance that I spoke about between investor, entrepreneur, and mentor, our triumvirate. So without further ado, it's my privilege to invite Krishna Kumar Natarajan, or KK as he is more popularly known, who's the co-founder of Mela Ventures, and until very recently was co-founder and executive chairman of Mindtree. They say if you dream something more than once, it's sure to come true. Those lines from the fairy tale Sleeping Beauty is pretty much where my co-founder Anup Kuruvilla will perhaps start, as he kicks off Conversation 101 with KK and asks him about his journey, the fairy tale success that Mindtree became, his advice for B2B SaaS entrepreneurs, and of course, Mela Ventures. Over to you, Anup and KK.
Thanks a lot, Anand.
Anup, you're on mute.
He's still on mute.
Hi, Anup, you'll have to mute yourself.
Maybe KK can interview Anup after he joins.
Now, John, can you, as a host, unmute Anup?
Yeah, I have. I've sent him apparently an unmute request. So I think he
Okay.
needs to accept that. But
Okay.
I presume there's something wrong with his screen due to which he can't
He can't do that. Okay.
he can't see my request. Anup, perhaps I can request you to log out and log back in.
Or alternatively, Anup, maybe you'd like to dial in from your mobile.
Well, I guess maybe Zoom is still the better option, despite being Chinese.
Sorry about that. I'm back again. Okay. Sorry to my apologies for this confusion. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Anup Kuruvilla. I partner with entrepreneurs as part of my work as a co-founder of OneCrowd. In my spare time, I cycle and play some tennis. I also work with PWDs, people with disabilities, through the Leonard Cheshire Disability Movement, including the Cheshire Disability Trust in Bangalore. The good thing about introducing KK is that he is so well known that he doesn't need much of an introduction. He studied at Guindy Engineering and then did his MBA at XLRI. In both places, he was the head of the Students' Union, well loved and liked by all, but most important, demonstrated from an early stage an ability to get things done. I must also tell you that he had aspirations and was an avid cricketer. I was reading recently Ramchandra Guha's book on cricket, where you may have read that he himself mentions in his own very nice and humble way that fortunately for Indian cricket, he decided not to pursue that career. And instead, he became obviously an outstanding historian. And so similarly, fortunately for Indian cricket, KK decided to give up his cricketing life and joined Wipro, where he was there for several years. And then in late 1999, with some other ex-colleagues of his, he set up Mindtree and helped to build that into the outstanding organization it is. 20 years later, of course, that got acquired by L&T, and it was time for him to change his avatar again and founded, along with his ex-Mindtree colleague Partha and Parthasati, Mela Ventures, a very tech-focused VC firm. I'm glad to inform you that OneCrowd and Mela Ventures have an informal understanding to share information on all deals, and we work very closely together. In fact, we have co-invested with Mela in their inaugural deal, Infilect, which is a company operating in the retail tech space using image recognition technology to help retail and brands to become far more efficient. And there are a few more which we are looking at working on together. We have several investors as well as entrepreneurs attending this webinar today. And we thought that this will be a great opportunity for them to get a better understanding of what Mela is all about. With that in mind, let me come straight to the start of the event today and request KK to share with us his journey in Mindtree. What we wanted to cover with you, KK, is that in a very short time, you and your colleagues were able to scale Mindtree up to $1 billion company. What were the key ingredients for Mindtree to be able to successfully scale up in such a short time? And what is the advice you would like to give to our budding young startups today?
Thanks, Anup. In a way, if you leave me, I will talk about this the whole day, but considering that others will have to leave after some time, I'll try and keep it as crisp as possible. I think for the entrepreneurs here, the first thing I would like to share with them is that I used to say that the entrepreneurial journey is a marathon. Now, in recent times, I've sort of changed my view on that. I don't view it as a marathon. I think it's an Ironman. So to that extent, I think it's great that many of you are undertaking this journey, but it's important to realize that there are huge pains, at the same time, phenomenal opportunities where you'll really learn and love it. Because if you look at the whole idea of entrepreneurship, the odds of succeeding are not very high. I read a book by a guy called David Brown, who said that only 1 in 50 ideas becomes a business. Then you start getting some funding, maybe some friends and family angel funding, then you get some institutional funding. But of the companies which get funded, only 1 in 20 reaches a stage where they've been able to scale and become a company which is publicly listed. And out of the publicly listed companies, only 1 in 20 become $1 billion companies. So in a way, many times when I think of the Mindtree journey, it was a 1 in 20,000 odds to become $1 billion listed company. I can't think of many other instances where the odds are lower. The only thing which I can think now is probably the odds of the Indian cricket team beating Australia tomorrow will be higher. It'll probably be 1 to 50,000. I think alone that, I think it's a fairly exhausting and, but at the same time, very satisfying journey. So coming specifically in terms of what are some of the key learnings, I think at different stages of the organization, you get to know different things. And I think the early stage of the organization, where you probably are a startup and you're just sort of gaining traction to get your first few customers, that's a very interesting stage. And most of the people who, after having worked as successful entrepreneurs, executives tend to become entrepreneurs. You always tend to misjudge, saying, hey, I've done it for a larger company. I will do it here in a jiffy. I think that's probably the first learning. What success you achieved in larger organizations like a Wipro or TCS or an Accenture has no reflection in terms of your success as an entrepreneur. And to that extent, every founder has to ensure that he's the salesman of the company. You just hit out in the streets, start really getting your first customers, because without that, the business will not go anywhere. The second big lesson in the early stage is to really pick your team right. Because I think it's important that leaders set the tone of the organization. And it's important to pick the right leadership team who are aligned to your vision and are willing to go through both the ups and downs of the business. And lastly, I think there's a lot talked in the entrepreneurial ecosystem of investors and the color of capital. I've seen many entrepreneurs almost say, oh, if I only get Sequoia or an Axel or someone to invest, my business will become successful. I must be honest, having watched both Mindtree and a number of other entrepreneurs, I think that's the least for success. I think you must really pick your investors carefully and ensure that you get somebody who's more aligned to your business and your way of thinking, rather than getting the branded or the marquee investor who at the end of the day may not really contribute so much to your success. So picking the right investor, picking the right team, and the founder really playing a role of really driving initial customer acquisition, I think is very important. Beyond that stage, as you start to scale, there are different things in terms of how do you set up the organization for scale, which means how do you evolve an extremely good people process. As you diversify as an organization, you get in new leaders. How do you ensure that the culture of the company is retained and leaders really walk the talk? Because many times I find entrepreneurs not adequately focusing on the softer aspects of people and culture, because you cannot add on these when you scale. These are essential foundational building blocks of building any sustainable company. And to that extent, you need to start thinking of what sort of a culture you want for the company. How do you really build this? How do your leaders transmit and assimilate the culture are extremely important. So at the stage of scaling, what I see is important is focus on building in the right operational process, focus on building the right people process, and ensuring that you build the company on a strong cultural foundation is extremely important. Having said that, once you get to a certain scale, I think depending on the market which you're addressing, there are different things which become important. Again, to quickly fast forward and say what I saw as important in the Mindtree context was that we always had a view of the future. What would the future look like and how do we need to get prepared for the future? Which in a way resulted in Mindtree amongst the IT services companies taking an early bet on digital, which obviously made us far more successful than many of the traditional players. The second important thing many times would look very odd, and as a listed company, people will hesitate to talk about it in public. I think we were never bothered about valuations. We said if we build a good company, if the foundations of the company are built on high quality governance and transparency, valuations is really a byproduct of a good company which you build. Yes, I think we didn't get rewarded for it immediately, but over a longer term, we do believe it certainly helped us well. And the last element is how do you build internal leadership where people walk the talk, propagate the culture, and ensure that they are very customer focused and not get really dragged on by what you could see as short-term disappointments in the business. The other key element which is relating to governance is transparency. But many times as an organization, can you really take a stance which is really in the best interest of all stakeholders? Again, just to give a Mindtree context, somewhere after getting listed and being a bumper IPO and really feeling that we have arrived in life, we committed one of the most, I would say, large strategic blunder as a company. And clearly the markets punished us. In fact, from our IPO listing price, our valuations came down to 20% of our value. We had pressure from investors. But what do we do at that time? What we did right was to own up our mistake. We went to the markets and said, you know what? we have been stupid. We have done a massive error. Give us a year or two, and we will show you a new company. We'll come out of this. Obviously, a lot of the senior management in the company did not like such a transparent attitude. They felt that we are being weak, and we lost almost 40% of our senior management because they didn't agree with the decision. But touch wood, we went through difficult times, and within 2 years, we came out as the most promising company as judged by CNBC TV 18. Now, so I think my response on this would be at various stages of the company. In a way, I see the company like a human being. What you need to do as a young adult to what you do as an adult to what do you do as someone who's grown. I think the responses are very different. And these are some of my learnings during the various stages of Mindtree.
Thank you. Thank you for that and for being very honest about those challenges which you had just after that IPO. I remember those days. Let me come to an area where you have decided to make it your investment focus area, which is B2B enterprise SaaS. How and why did you choose B2B enterprise SaaS to be an investment focus area for Mela Ventures? And how do you see this space evolving in India over the next few years?
That's a great question, Anup. See, to a large extent, since you'd been in the space, and like I said, a lot of time at Mindtree we used to spend in terms of saying, how is the future going to look like? I think there are 4 key forces which are changing with respect to the whole enterprise technology play. The first one is, I think the technology debt in enterprises is increasing. What I mean by that is a lot of the enterprises have applications and systems which they have built maybe 30, 40 years back. And clearly those are not going to stay the course. So the first key driver, I think, is that there is a lot of tech debt within enterprises. The second key element, which is more technology driven, is that unlike early times when if you had 2 different applications, integrating them and looking at a common source of truth was almost a nightmare because both these applications were built on very different technologies, different databases. So it would become very difficult. Whereas in the recent past, I think technology has evolved so that integrating applications becomes far more simpler. The third driver is that some of the new technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, or computer vision, or augmented and virtual reality, they are becoming much more mainstream today. And for organizations to adopt that, they need to think of a new set of solutions. And lastly is really the much hyped about or talked about cloud and the way in which it helps organizations evolve their IT technology solutions much more quicker. So if you look at these 4 forces, coupled with what I think are behavioral changes which are happening in enterprise. If you think of 15 years back, any IT spend could be done only by the chief information officer. So the way in which we used to calculate our total addressable market was that saying retail will spend 1.5% of revenue, financial services will spend 2% of revenue, and that's how the total addressable market came. But in today's enterprise, technology is getting a lot more democratized. The digital marketing officer is spending money on technology, the chief digital officer is spending money on technology. So as a process of technology spending gets democratized, the spend on technology is also getting larger. So if I were to juxtapose the 4 forces which are driving a different way of technology adoption, coupled with the behavioral changes which are happening in enterprises, I would believe it is such an exciting time to be in B2B. There was a report which Bain & Co. released just 2 days back saying that enterprise SaaS companies out of India will reach revenues of 18 to 20 billion by 2022. That's their estimate, and it's a short time, and a well-known consultant like Bain may not make a huge mistake. But my view is that if you look at the Indian IT services industry, which is really, I think, a landmark in terms of how companies can build globally successful businesses. It's about $170, $180 billion and a market cap, if you include even companies which are listed outside India, of about 300 billion plus. I believe the enterprise SaaS market in the next 10 years will be at least as large as the Indian IT services business today, and a market cap probably of 300 to 400 billion. So the sheer size of the opportunity is just absolutely enormous and exciting. And that's really the reason why we said we'll focus on that. The second key reason is our own experience comes from, in a way, helping global enterprises think through a lot of their digitization initiatives. So a lot of the network we have, our understanding of go-to-market issues, of selling to global enterprises, we really thought we could leverage in the enterprise SaaS space. So if I were to look at this market generating or creating companies which will create a market cap of 300 to 400 billion, 50% of them are going to be new companies. They either don't exist today or they're probably in the making. And my aspiration is, even if we pick 10% of those companies, I think there's enough money we'll make for our investors.
Thank you. Thanks for that. In this space, what is the right time for the startup, for the B2B enterprise SaaS company to target customers overseas? And is the US market still the most natural starting point?
See, I think the great opportunity we have is a lot of the technology can be foolproofed and you can get them ready leveraging Indian customers. So when you really go out, you should really only start targeting overseas markets after you have at least, say, 8 to 10 customers who have really using your solutions and you're able to demonstrate visible business outcomes for that. Having said that, I don't see US just as a market immediately. Yeah. I think organizations need to think in terms of what is their own understanding of the market, what are their key client needs. More than anything else, what are the drivers which are forcing customers to look at a change in the current solution which they're using? Because if there is a lot of pain which customers are facing with respect to the solution which they're using, those would be more appropriate ones to address in the early stage. To me, while US is still the biggest spend, the enterprise selling complexity in US is far higher, and typically most startups do not have the ability to sort of address that level of enterprise selling complexity. So I would suggest that they should build scale by addressing India, maybe the adjacent markets like Asia Pacific, before they really launch into the more developed markets like US. Here again, I have a theory around it. Many founders believe that they'd like to raise capital because they want to expand sales and marketing. And the moment you quiz them, they'll say, hey, the moment we get the capital, we'll recruit few sales guys in US, and then the doors will just open. Customers will keep lining up. It's an absolutely wrong illusion to think that by recruiting a few sales guys, you're going to get sales. With founding teams, which I work with, one of the absolute key thing we tell them was, if you're at a stage where you think you're ready to address the US market, one of the founders should really move to the market, be there for a couple of years, get the first 10, 15 customers, and then expand your sales team.
Very, very true. In fact, I see a lot of our founders at this webinar today. So let me ask you a question which I think they are all constantly asking themselves. What is the right time for the tech founders to bring in a sales head? What's the right time to bring them into the team?
See, many of the tech founders with whom I work with, for them, I think there's a little bit of apprehension in terms of selling. I think most tech founders have grown with an idea that selling is not the most, what you could call respectful sort of work to do. But let me tell you, as a founder, if you're not knocking the doors of customers, getting rejected 100 times, you can never recruit a good sales guy because you don't know what happens there. Yeah. So my advice to many of these founders have been saying that, have you gone and sold in the market? How many times have you got rejected? What is the one sale or two sales which you have done? Once you have that experience and you're confident that what are the things which make a customer take, then you should bring in a sales head. But if you're trying to do it as a delegation, I don't think the company will go anywhere.
Fair enough. I still remember one piece of advice which you had given us when we were looking at one company, saying that this company, you better start seriously thinking of them bringing in a founder as a sales head.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's also something very interesting, really, saying that you need to have, sometimes to have a sales head, don't call him a VP sales, call him a founder. He needs that title. But anyway, that's a separate point. I know we are running short of time, and I want to keep some time open for Q&A, which I'm sure there will be. But why don't we spend some time on Mela Ventures itself? Maybe you may want to talk about the size of the fund. What are the types of companies which you are considering to be investing in? What is the size of your typical initial check going to be? What is the investment philosophy of Mela Ventures? I think that the audience may enjoy.
Absolutely. Again, when we thought of Mela Ventures, we said it's not about me or Partha, it's about entrepreneurs. So clearly at Mela Ventures, we'd like to put the entrepreneurs in the spotlight rather than any of us. Because we do believe, I talked about the exciting opportunities we see in the global enterprise SaaS market. And today we are convinced that in the next 10 years, we are going to see probably 80 to 100 unicorns in enterprise SaaS, which are all built out of India. Now, for doing this, what is it that we are looking for? We are really looking for entrepreneurs who have the passion to solve difficult problems. So they're not building technology for technology's sake, but they're really solving a real business problem. We are looking for entrepreneurial teams which are transparent, with whom you can debate, whom you can push back, and help them make the right decisions. Because honestly, while I shared a couple of mistakes which he did in Mindtree, there are hundreds of mistakes which he did. And I really think no other entrepreneur needs to repeat the same mistake. So the value which we can bring in is to say, avoid this mistake because it just doesn't work. So we're looking for entrepreneurs who have that collaborative mindset, who are willing to debate, push back, and get at decisions which are right. We're looking for entrepreneurs who have a high learnability quotient. Because we think the business is all about dropping your current mindset perceptions and learning, saying, what is it that will work and what is it that will not work? We are looking for people who want to build a high quality business with high governance and transparency. Because fundamentally, we believe in the idea that if you build a high quality business, valuations will happen. Unfortunately, today, a lot of entrepreneurs are more valuation driven than thinking in terms of a high quality business. Having said what we want of entrepreneurs, now coming to the size of the fund is a 200 crore fund. The idea is to invest in about 12 to 14 companies. I must say that we have very consciously taken a position because in early stage, most funds follow an approach of what you call shoot and spray, because one of them will work and two of them will work, the rest won't work. Whereas we think pick and nurture is what we would like to adopt. So we're very selective with the entrepreneurs whom we invest in. And typically we would put in anywhere from, say, 7 to 9 crores as our first check. The idea is to be the first institutional investor in the company. And a double-digit ownership in the company is very important for us. So we would certainly love to have a double-digit ownership in the company, which means we typically enter at valuations anywhere from 30 to 50 million is the range at which we enter. The idea is to help these entrepreneurs who've got potentially maybe a run rate of maybe 1 crore, 2 crores, help them scale up by 8x to 10x in 3 to 4 years, and make them ready for a larger serious institutional funding, maybe a Series A or so, where we would also invest and continue to sort of grow them. But once they potentially reach a scale of probably raising a Series B, Series C, at that time, depending on how the returns look for our investors, we will exit out. So that's really the theme. We think early checks of 7 to 9 crores will put in about 12 to 14 companies. We will do follow-on funding probably for half that number. Again, we do realize out of the 14, not all will be successful, but probably for half that number, we would certainly love to sort of go on for a follow-on funding. But by and large, I think we are very keen on this idea of entrepreneurs wanting to build businesses where they're solving a real business problem. They're wanting to build a high quality business, and they're willing to do it in a collaborative manner.
Thank you. Thanks very much, KK, for that. We have about another 15-20 minutes of time left for this webinar. Maybe Anil, can I request you to take the question and answer session?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you, Anup, and thank you, KK. That was wonderful, very, very insightful. So what we'll do now is we'll open the webinar to Q&A. If I mean, to the extent possible, we'd like each question to be asked by the individual themselves, by putting themselves, turning off mute and asking that question rather than using the chat program. So if each of you can press the raise hand icon if you're using your laptops, and then you can, you form a queue and then you can start asking your questions one by one. But if that is not possible, then please unmute yourselves and ask your question, and we'll organize the sequencing. We're open to questions now.
Hi KK, this is Ram Krishnan here.
Yes, Ram, how are you? Yeah.
Anup, you didn't mention that KK was an amazing table tennis player. He was
oh my God.
captain, and I think I had the pleasure of playing with him both on the TT team as well as the cricket team. KK, my question to you has to do with how do you handle differences or dissonances in a startup team? Some of us are aware of what Mindtree went through and some separations at a very, very apex level. But how do you manage that kind of a transition?
I think that's an important question, Ram. Again, one of the things I tell founding teams is that, I must be honest, as an investment philosophy at Mela Ventures, we don't invest in one-founded teams because we do think that multi-founded teams have always a value. But having said that, there will be differences. But the key thing which the team needs to understand is that what is the value which each person brings in, and if it pertains to that area, then the other person's sort of step back. Again, just to give you a Mindtree context, between me and Subrata, we are very different individuals. I am a very number-oriented, left-brain-oriented person, whereas Subrata is exactly the opposite. He is right-brain-oriented, creative. So I know when to step back if the issue really involves more what the decision will become better with the creative right brain oriented thinking. Though I might have my view, I just used to step back, which is equally true on financial matters. Subrata will not even he might have a view, he'll express it, but then, so between teams, I always recommend saying that you need to understand what is the strength each person brings in, and you must have the mental maturity and perspective to allow the person whom you think has a better understanding than you to make that decision. It can't be that one person makes the decision all the time.
Thank you so much, KK.
Thank you, KK.
This is Sushma. May I go next?
Hi, Sushma. Just before you go, Ganesh, you wanted to ask a question. If you can go ahead, and I think after that we have Guru Raj, and then you, Sushma.
Sounds good.
Yes. The last thing I want to do was come in Sushma's way, but nevertheless.
I knew you would say that, Ganesh.
KK, I have a question for you because I mean, like you, we also 3 years back investing in companies which will scale. So much of opportunity in impact investing, in the sense that given COVID and given all the problems in our country, we're really saying that whatever money we want to, I mean, even if it's only a 5% return, it's still something that we'd like to do. So I was just wondering whether Mela Ventures would also be open to some good impact investing ideas in social enterprises, for profit, but social.
Ganesh, one thing which we decided was we'll just be focused on a few things, and clearly impact investing is not one of them. The reason is when we thought of this initially, we said as Mindtree founders, we'll do this. Then we went outside and raised money from other investors and a few family offices. So we do think of ourselves as a pooled capital where we have really shared with investors that this is what we'll do. So we certainly don't intend getting into the impact investing space.
Sure.
Hi, KK. This is Raj.
Go ahead, Guru.
Hi. KK, two things. Do you see the current pandemic, which we are in the midst of it, does it change the fundamental investor outlook over the next 3 to 5 years as an investment philosophy? Similarly, do you expect a change in the founders' behavior given the situation around? So, is there a change in your investment outlook and philosophy, and do you expect a different set of character or features in when you encounter founding teams of various startups?
See, Guru, I must say that in the course of the pandemic, my thinking has changed. When it first hit in March, April, I must say there was a lot of gloom and doom. Every startup where I used to meet was really in the panic mode of saying, can we cut costs by 40%, 80%, 90%, and so on. Now, to be honest, as we have lived through it, I think the market has only proven differently. In fact, I was speaking to someone, in a sense, it's a reputed consulting company, who said their research shows that adoption of digitization has moved ahead by 5 years because of the pandemic. Look at it, the opportunities which it creates. In fact, in the recent past, I've only seen startups being far more optimistic of what is in store for them, partly because the pandemic has accelerated the need for technology. Like this event which you're doing today, at the end of the day, has led to a huge valuation of a Zoom and potentially so many other companies. So I think this has actually been a trigger for startups particularly in the technology space, to be more optimistic of the future. Having said that, in terms of founder mentality, has it changed? I think one is seeing a big difference. There are a set of companies which do not have a runway ahead, where for whatever reason they had not raised funds, and because of the burn, they've run out of cash. One sees that they are unwilling to see the opportunity. They are unable to push themselves to pivot. But whereas companies which have survived are clearly thinking in terms of saying, hey, how do I now build on this? Fine, I may not have capital to survive for 2 years, but let me sort of wade through this crisis and come out stronger out of that. And I do see that many startups will come out of this pandemic stronger than ever.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Samir. Would you like to ask your question now? Sushma, first you and then Samir.
Hey, hi, KK.
Hi, Sushma.
Hi. So the question that I have for you is this, what has been the biggest de-learning that you've had to do as you have transitioned from being an entrepreneur, to running a mega company, to now being an investor? So is there any de-learning you've had to do?
No, I'll tell you significant de-learning, Sushma. Like starting with the first one, and I said, as an exec of Wipro, the people who gave you meetings and gave you business, when you approach them as an entrepreneur, would say, hey, rather than meeting in the office, why don't you meet in the coffee shop close by? So starting from that, saying that what success you achieved as a part of a larger company doesn't translate to your success. So you need to sort of change yourself. But the biggest thing which I learned as an entrepreneur to building a large company was that how do you ensure connectedness of your teams and ensuring that teams are aligned? Because even within the country context, I've seen that aligned teams used to deliver substantively 20-30% better result than teams which had some issues between themselves. The importance of culture and how do you ensure that leaders walk the talk and in a way assimilate the culture, and this becomes more important when you grow large as a company. And the importance of continuing to invest in building people, building teams. And lastly, enjoying what you do. I think that's the most important thing. Many times in a lighter vein, we used to say that while the culture of Mindtree we used to define as high performing, high caring, what binds all of us together is cheap thrills and good food. So I think that's important to enjoy the journey which you have. I think that's the learning in terms of building a company which is large. But I tell you, my learnings as an investor in the last maybe year and a half have probably been much larger than what I had as an entrepreneur for 20 years and prior to that 19 years as an exec in Wipro. Because I think every day you're meeting such smart guys. Well, Guru talked about the pandemic. I think we've seen some of the classiest and fearless entrepreneurs during this time when everybody has been talking of gloom and doom. And my biggest learning has been saying that, hey, how did I miss all of this early on? Now, I never even knew that such a world existed. So today, my key thing is saying that, hey, when I'm meeting somebody, what can I learn from them?
Fabulous. Thank you, KK.
Thank you, KK. Thank you, Sushma. Samir, would you like to go?
Yeah. Hi, KK. Long time.
Long time. Sorry.
Welcome to the VC world. So my question is, you seem to say that for SaaS companies, it is a preferred option for them to first target the Indian and other emerging markets before they address the US market. But a common issue with the Indian market, at least historically, has been that most clients
Don't
need
pay.
a lot of, so one is the ability to pay, a willingness to pay, and the other is the amount of involvement they need from the senior management, right?
Correct.
And the SaaS model is better suited for a market like US where it is DIY, right? So
Yeah.
how do you see that challenge in the Indian market?
I mean, I think you absolutely point out the right issues in the Indian market. But what I have been seeing is that even the Indian market is changing, not to the extent which all of us would like it to do, but certainly the Indian market is changing. Yeah. First, because I think technology is becoming more core even to the businesses they run. So people understand that the way in which they buy technology, or earlier software is sold along with people, that sort of a model is no more applicable. But beyond that, I think, again, when I said that, I said it's important to make your product ready for the global markets. So when we look at opportunities at Mindtree, one of the first questions we keep critically asking is, can this problem scale to address a global enterprise? That's a very important criteria for us. So the idea is that you have a market which is in a way tolerant, where you can build your product, foolproof it, and then start scaling up on that.
Right. So understand. Thanks.
Thank you, Samir, for that. Anybody else with a question for KK?
No, this is Situ. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yes, Situ.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. KK, coming back, following up on the question from the previous questionnaire, the SaaS for enterprise. SaaS for enterprise, Indian context, for example. Just some real world examples, just so some of these definitely technically oriented have definitions correct about SaaS for enterprise. Just some hypotheticals on.
Oh, you want some real life examples?
Hypothetical for SaaS for enterprise in Indian market, for example.
No, but if you look at some of the Indian SaaS companies which have become global and reasonably successful, Zoho is clearly an example. Yes, they may not be the scale of a Microsoft Office or, for that matter, Google, but clearly is almost a $2 billion company and probably more successful in terms of the approaches they have taken to building teams, building software. Or for that matter, Freshdesk, again, in the low-end CRM customer service space, is very good. There are a couple of niche players who are making a mark. I don't think you'd have heard of a company called Eka Software, which is primarily in commodity risk management and trading. Again, a global SaaS business where they've probably got maybe 15, 20 of the largest commodity players in the world using their solution. In the industrial IoT space, there is a company called Flutura Decision Sciences, which I know in the last 10 deals where GE tried entering this business, they beat GE hands down practically in every one of those deals. So I was just referring to, in the early part of the conversation, the report which Bain & Co. has released on enterprise SaaS companies out of India. They have, I think, talked about, if I recollect right, 48 companies which are anywhere in the revenue range of 50 to 100 million, which is not large by the US context at all. It is actually puny and small. But at the same time, month after month, quarter after quarter, they're gaining market share. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I'll just wanted to get us some products or projects. Thanks.
Thank you, Situ. Anybody else? Question?
Yeah. KK, Prabhakar here.
Yes, Prabhakar.
Yeah, can you give us some of the interesting sort of ideas or thoughts which are going currently in the space of SaaS for enterprises, which are in early stage and are providing a real solution? In which space?
See, since Anup mentioned that we made a joint investment in this company called Infilec Technologies, I'll talk about that and probably one other thing which you're still evaluating, where we've done some investment which you're evaluating. See, if you look at the retail execution space, brand managers have very little visibility in terms of what is the shelf space they get, what is the competitive activity at a retail store. And a lot of this data used to come to them on a monthly basis, where they use the AC Nielsen, what they call store research data or market research data. And they used to pay a lot for it. This company where we invested in uses computer vision. On top of computer vision, they've used artificial intelligence and machine learning to train the visual images which they take to recognize product packaging and what the packaging is to the accuracy of 98, 99%. So the solution they've evolved, it runs on an enterprise SaaS model. So the merchandiser of the company, when he goes to a retail store on a standard Android phone, just takes a couple of photographs. It gets fed to the cloud, they apply the AI algorithms, and within practically a few hours, the brand manager gets a feedback saying that in the Shantinagar location where you've given incentive to 20 stores, compared to what you should be getting as a preferred shelf location, you're getting only X%. These stores are not in line with the promotion guidelines you've set. These are the two competitive activities which your competition has initiated. Do you want to respond to that? So it's all about real-time actionable feedback to the brand managers to take decisions, and then continue to measure, are they gaining market share based on this action and insights? So this is one example of an enterprise software thing, just in a very narrow space of retail execution using computer visioning technology coupled with AI. Yeah. Similarly, we're talking to another interesting company which is in the digital broadcasting space. All of us watch the IPL, and of course, Hotstar was the digital broadcaster. But there is a lot of technology behind it. One piece of technology is how do you optimize the digital broadcast for different infrastructure and form factors available. The second key thing is how do you serve the ad? That is a whole technology space called the ad server. Whereas this company is working on revenue enhancement for digital broadcasters, where they will help them gain larger revenue using whatever is the advertising space based on location, based on target segment of customers, and so on. Now, so these are two. This again completely delivered on a software as a service model.
Okay, good. That's very good. Thanks.
Thank you, Prabhakar. Anybody else?
Hey, Rajesh here. I had a question.
No, Rajesh, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. KK, I had a question. We haven't seen too many scalable companies in the B2B SaaS space in the education sector, in the K-12 segment, or similar space. Do you see any inherent problems in this sector because of which we don't have too many B2B SaaS players? Have you seen any
Rajesh, I must be honest, we don't at Mela focus on the education tech space, partly because I think it's already the sector is very hot. And the second thing is none of us have worked in that segment. But I think the opportunities are huge. Again, I can think of one company with whom I've sort of couple of times sort of interacted with them just to help them think through their thing, a company called Simply Learn, which is primarily in corporate education and training, where I think they're right now at a sub $10 million type of revenue, but hoping to get to a $25 million revenue range. A second company is more in the training space, but using a little different thing of gamification now, because they have built an entire training suite based on gamification. The company is called Nullscape. That's also in the $10.5, $11 million range. I agree, these are not looking promising as scale right now, but I think both the companies have the opportunity to become at least a $100 million company over the next 4-5 years.
Great. Thank you, KK, for that. Thank you, Rajesh. We've actually exceeded and overshot time by about 5 minutes, but perhaps one last question. Anybody? All right. KK, we couldn't have asked for a better start to Conversations 101. It's been great. I've never seen participation on any of our webinars to the extent that we've seen today, and quite clearly, the draw has been you. So we can't thank you enough, KK, for your time this evening. Thank you so very much for sharing all those wonderful insights with the audience that we had, many of whom are entrepreneurs and who I'm sure would benefit immensely from following your advice. I'd also like to thank each and every one of the participants for sparing over an hour this evening. Thank you so much for being with us and for making our inaugural session of Conversations 101 such a tremendous success. Thank you all so very much, and see you on our next episode. I think it'll be sometime now in January, but we look forward to your support. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, Anil. I really enjoyed the session. I just want to make one correction. I think the draw was equally Anup, because a lot of people are wanting to, in a way, pick up some tips on how he's such a killer. So,
yeah. We heard that he was called killer in college, and we keep using that to pull his leg now.
Thank you. Thanks to all for joining, and wish you all a great holiday season ahead.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.